Welcome to What America's Thinking, where we discuss key elections, demographic trends, and public opinion. I'm Rafael Bernal.
And I'm Julia Manchester. We want to get right into a developing story. This week, the FBI searched President Joe Biden's vacation home in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. According to the president's personal attorney, no classified documents were found.
A new poll by the Associated Press reveals that 39% of Americans disapprove of President Biden's handling of the discovery and 23% approve. Broken down by party, 15% of Democrats disapprove of the document handling compared to 68% of Republicans. And while more Americans disapprove of the president's classified document situation, his approval rating, it appears to be holding steady with Democrats. 77% approve of his overall job performance. So it looks like President Biden's not really taking a hit with the documents scandal. Can we even call it a scandal?
You know, I don't know if we can call it a scandal yet because, well, we could, I guess, call it a scandal, but a bipartisan scandal, because we know that former President Trump and former Vice President Mike Pence are going through a very similar process. But I'm wondering if this is more indicative of a broader problem about classified documents and how they're handled by outgoing officials. Obviously, this document issue traces back with Biden to when he was vice president, with Pence to when he was vice president, to Donald Trump when he was president. So, you know, I think because it's bipartisan, maybe voters are starting to cut him some slack. And I also think, for voters, this is still an inside Washington issue. Obviously, it's very important. But I'm thinking maybe they're more concerned about issues like the economy, for example, like, the situation at the southern border, more of those kitchen table issues versus something that still is very inside Washington. That being said, though, I think Republicans are going to look to pounce on this issue, especially on Capitol Hill. It's just another thing they can add to their laundry list of investigations against the president. Yeah,
they are not going to take their finger off of this. We've been introduced to words like spillage. Apparently, there is not that much. There are a lot of documents that just get spilled out into the world, and it seems to be a common practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wonder, what that means going forward. I mean, will we see more officials, past officials have their homes or their properties investigated? What does this mean for, former presidents? I think President Obama said that he did not have, or his office did not have, any classified information, but it's certainly something to keep an eye on. And former President Trump is facing a criminal investigation over the documents found at his home. And even though the two presidents handled their situations very differently, an NBC poll shows that there is an equal concern about those discoveries. Joining us now to weigh in on this and other pressing topics is Virginia Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger. This week, she was selected to serve on the House Intelligence Committee. Congresswoman Spanberger, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I wanted to ask you a question about the Senate Intelligence Committee and your fellow Virginian, Mark Warner, just to start with a news of the day question. He's been calling for, along with his co-chairperson, Marco Rubio, for the Justice Department to provide the committee with access to classified documents found at former President Trump and President Biden's homes. Do you think the Justice Department should provide that material? And do you think there is a broader issue at play with maybe the overclassification of material being found at some of these officials' homes?
So to answer the second question, I think the issue is that there's classified documents that somehow gets boxed up, and either because a president wants to take it or because it's in a box that moves to a presidential center or presidential home, that we have now confirmed that there's been classified documents, certainly at former President Trump's home, where we know he was endeavoring to keep them and not following subpoenas to return those documents, but also at President Biden's home and also at former Vice President Trump's home. As a former CIA officer, as somebody who handled classified information every single day and wrote material that went and became classified because of the means by which we obtained it and the sensitivity of the assets providing that information to us, there are clearly problems with the chain of custody of these documents. And I think that there needs to be a full understanding of how it is that any former elected official or currently serving elected official would be able to box up documents either intentionally or unintentionally, and move those out of any sort of secured space. As it relates to Virginia, I'm very pleased to be serving on the Intelligence Committee. Certainly, I have a background in intelligence, so hopefully that's an experience set that's of value to the committee. But I also represent so many men and women of the intelligence community, career public servants who serve at home or abroad, to ensure that our policymakers, like myself, are making good and informed decisions. And those folks rotate around the world and so frequently come back home to Virginia. So to ensure that somebody really understands those agencies and is providing the proper oversight required by the Constitution, and also that benefits our country, I'm look forward to serving in that role.
So on the Intelligence Committee, let's stick with that for a second. There's been some talk about experience. We know Congressman Schiff won't be allowed to serve there because of Speaker McCarthy, really. There's been some talk about Congressman Quigley as well. How important is it to have people with experience serving in the committee, and how can Democrats best manage the new political realities of that committee?
Well, this is a select committee, which I think is important to note because it's a committee that does automatically have term limits. So this isn't a committee like I also serve on foreign affairs and agriculture, where for the entirety of my time in Congress, if I had served one term or if I serve many, many terms, I could be on those committees for the entirety of my time. The select committee is supposed to be a committee that people rotate onto and rotate off. It's term limited. And so I do think that is an important function, particularly for such a smaller committee. My appointment to this committee marks the first time that from the Democratic side of the aisle, we have a former case officer who will be serving on that committee, kind of firsthand experience in the collection of human intelligence. Previously, Will Hurd, Republican from Texas, who had also been a CIA case officer, served on the Intelligence Committee as well. And I believe he was the first case officer to ever serve on the Intelligence Committee. But you can fact check me on that one, but I believe he was the first.
Right, right. And, I want to talk about an issue that's really been a major interest of yours, and that's insider trading and, preventing members of Congress and their spouses from taking part in that practice. We know that you have co-sponsored a bill with Republican Congressman Chip Roy, and it's gotten really a diverse group of co-sponsors ranging from conservative Congressman Matt Gaetz to Adam Schiff. Wanted to get your sense as to the status of that legislation and when we can expect to see it move forward.
So this is the third time we've introduced this legislation. Each time, Chip Roy and I have built out a broader and broader coalition for our initial introduction. We introduced it with 35 members. We've already surpassed, built up past 50. We're going to keep doing that. The premise of this legislation is very, very simple. Members of Congress shouldn't be able to buy or sell individual stocks during our time in Congress. We have classified briefings. We have access to information. We sit down with CEOs and leaders in major industry because we need to do that for our jobs as members of Congress. And we should never ever be leaving any of those briefings and calling our broker and telling them, please buy or please sell this stock. But even more importantly, I think this legislation is about taking a step forward and demonstrating to the American people that they can and should trust us, that we are willing to put limitations, if you could call it that, on our financial holdings, on our financial actions or transactions, in order to affirm to the American people that the decisions we're making, the briefings we're attending, the votes we're taking, we are doing that in the best interest of serving our communities and not our stock portfolios. So it's pretty straightforward legislation. You can't buy or sell stocks while you're in Congress. If you come to Congress with individual stock holdings and you want to keep them, you have to put them into a blind trust and have an independent blind trust manager manage them. Mutual funds, diversified funds, that's okay. Save for your retirement. But you should never be calling your stockbroker to buy or sell a stock, here or there.
Now, there's some questions about this sort of legislation because there's such a diversity of wealth in Congress. You have people with net worth from the tens of thousands of dollars. Sometimes we've even had some with negative tens of thousands of dollars to the hundreds of millions of dollars. How does this legislation account for, the very different realities that somebody who might be more representative of a lot of Americans who don't have millions of dollars and they might not even know how to set up a blind trust?
Well, and that's the reality is there's many members of Congress who are middle-class families. They have a 401k. They have a diversified retirement fund. That's the extent of money in a savings account. They come to Congress, they do the job, and they're not thinking about calling their brokers. We also have members of Congress who've been very successful in business or perhaps have family wealth that has been invested in individual stocks. And so what some of those members, because some of those members have joined onto our legislation, have already been supportive, and some of those members have taken the steps of either divesting from individual stocks, so no longer want to hold XYZ ABC company stock, but indeed decided to put their money into mutual funds. Some have joked that it's probably better for their financial security because they lose too much money on the stock market. So whatever motivates them, put it into diversified savings. And some have chosen, because of their stock holdings, to put it into a blind trust. A blind trust certainly isn't for everyone. And so we do find that many of the individuals in Congress who want to be compliant with this legislation have chosen to put their savings in sort of the traditional diversified savings mechanisms such as mutual funds.
And Congresswoman, I know you have to run, but quick question on the debt ceiling. Speaker Kevin McCarthy seemed optimistic after his meeting with President Biden that they'll reach a deal or some sort of compromise before the U.S. could default on its debt. Are you hearing the same thing from your Republican and Democratic colleagues?
What I'm hearing from my Democratic and Republican colleagues, and of course there are some outliers, right? And that's the worrisome part. There are some outliers on the Republican side of the aisle who do not understand the catastrophic nature of a default, what it would mean for the economy, what it would mean for our constituents, what it would mean for every single aspect of our economic security, of our national security. But there is a hearty group of Republicans, and certainly the Democratic Party across the board understands the risk that comes with a potential default. So I am optimistic about this meeting. I am optimistic that the speaker is conveying that he recognizes the severity and the risk that comes with a potential default. My goal in this and my optimism in this is that we do not even want to get to the precipice of a default, because the precipice of the default in and of itself is an economic crisis for our country. We need to get a debt ceiling bill through. We need to do it quickly and well in advance of a potential default. So I maintain my optimism, but I keep working to make sure that anybody who may not understand or want to understand the severity of what we're facing is very clear-eyed about the choices that they're making if they want to play games with the full faith and credit of the United States.
Well, Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
We'll have more of What America's Thinking next.